officers had responded to a motel in Springfield. A housekeeper had discovered a deceased female inside the room.
This was clearly a violent death.
Well, I told her to quit doing that, and she was like, "What?" I said, "Putting that witchcraft on me." And she said in a sarcastic way, like, "I don't know nothing about witchcraft."
The vehicle is missing, and also the male that she was staying with is no longer on scene.
We need to figure out where people are, where vehicles are.
It was like every time I turned on the radio, I felt like they were talking about me. Like every song was about me, every talk show was talking about me. It's like as if they knew my whole entire life or something. Like they knew what was going on.
We're working a homicide now, and let's activate everybody.
Springfield, Oregon. On the morning of the 23rd of November 2014, police are called to the Village Inn after housekeeping staff discovered the lifeless body of a woman in room 219.
The first housekeeper thought maybe the woman was unconscious.
Police officer Alan Almanson is first to arrive at the scene.
I entered room 219 and I observed a female laying face down on the floor. So the next step is to call our detectives and get them involved. And while I'm waiting, I'm interviewing the witnesses. They had all checked out by that time, so I had to make phone calls. The motel staff gave me their phone numbers and I was calling, making phone calls while I waited for detectives.
I got the call when I was at home and was told that patrol officers responded after a housekeeper found a woman deceased in the hotel room. And I was asked to come in and investigate it myself and my partner. I suspected basically one of three things. A dispute had happened, somebody had been murdered. As a detective, you always want to assume the worst and work your way back. You don't want to assume nothing bad happened and run a shoddy investigation. You want your investigation to start with potential homicide and work your way down to natural cause death, and hoping that's what it is, but you want to start off thinking of the worst, honestly. Just to my left, upstairs, is the room we arrived at. I met with Detective Bryce down here. We talked real briefly, made our way up the stairway, headed up to room 219. Met with Officer Amundsen and got the briefing about what happened and what he observed, and tried to get a good idea what he suspected was going on. Detective Bryce and I entered the room and just walked around, assessed the area, looked at where the body was located, the condition of the room. We're looking for things like damaged property. We're looking for blood spatter. We're looking for weapons. We're looking for a pooling of blood to indicate a crime. The convenient thing about going to a crime scene at a motel is your crime scene is very small. It's condensed. You don't have a whole house or a backyard or a front yard or side areas like you would in a residential area. So your crime scene is generally a very small room with one access point in and out. There was marijuana and methamphetamine paraphernalia, pipes, baggies with drugs. A couple cell phones were in the room, but other than that, it looked like a lived-in motel room.
A room that was in general disarray that might suggest that a struggle had occurred. Nonetheless, the cause of death still was not clear.
The woman was positioned on the floor alongside the bed in the room. No obvious trauma, no blood pooling, no blood spatter, and no obvious injuries. So just a quick glance at her body didn't reveal an obvious cause of death.
We need a medical examiner to tell us what this case is, and that's really what we were waiting on, is a medical examiner's determination about cause and manner of death.
We continued with our examination of the room, and 2 phones that were found. I authored search warrants to examine those phones to make sure we were okay to be looking at that stuff. And a big clue came from that. As we were there, a text message had come across one of the phones, and the text message was from a number I didn't recognize. It was out of this area, a different area code, and the message indicated something along the lines of, "Hey, just checking to see how you're doing, haven't heard from you, are you still coming home?" We decided let's contact that person on that, whoever sent that text message, and ask them who they're texting and what they know. I spoke with a woman in Mississippi who said, yes, I was trying to reach Donna Perry, and she's supposed to be coming home, and I haven't heard from her, and I was just curious what was happening. And I said, well, what can you tell me about Donna? And she indicated Donna was from Mississippi. She was retired U.S. Army and took on another job after her military career. Had come to Oregon as part of a large group of people to work at a mill in town. There was a fire at a mill, and this group had come to town to do some work, some cleanup, construction on this mill area.
She and her half-brother caravanned out with other workers from Mississippi and were joined by her boyfriend.
Detectives discovered critical pieces of information about the deceased woman's stay at the Village Inn.
The female staying in the room was also staying with a male. She paid with her credit card for about half the nights, and the male paid with cash for the other half of the nights. She was in the room for about 22 days. The housekeepers also told me that the woman's car, which they described as a tan or gold vehicle, was no longer in the parking lot, which also raised some red flags for me.
The fact that there was a suitcase with men's clothes and a suitcase with women's clothes let us know somebody's missing here, and maybe something nefarious had happened.
We need to speak to the victim's boyfriend. Why is he in the wind? Also, is he potentially a victim of a crime? Has he been kidnapped and taken with somebody? Is he involved in this? A lot of questions that we didn't have the answers to on that first day.
He was a very strong person of interest. He was a focus as a possible suspect. At the same time, we can't eliminate the possibility he's a potential victim of crime as well. When we're dealing with motels, we're dealing with long-stay traffic, people who use drugs, whether it's methamphetamine or marijuana or otherwise. Oftentimes, robberies happen. People get robbed for their drugs, or they get robbed for the money that they're going to use to buy drugs. And I think it would have been naive of me to dismiss that possibility as potentially harmed, killed, or kidnapped by somebody. And we realized that night, the 23rd, her car was missing, and nobody knew where it was at. So we put a locate APB in the system across the country to anybody who sees this car to call us.
We need to speak to the victim's boyfriend.
And we started knocking on different doors to find out what other people may have heard or saw, and what other vehicles came and went, any information we can get at all.
The cause of her death is undetermined, but homicide has not been ruled out.
We have to develop that theory more into the cause of death, and that will really quickly indicate who may have done it. So the cause of death at the autopsy was key.
She had significant hemorrhaging on one side of her skull that wasn't readily apparent to detectives and the officer at the scene, that was only discovered during the autopsy, in which the doctor resects the scalp, and then you can see the underlying hemorrhaging and bruising on the scalp.
So as they delve deeper into the anatomy of the neck, there's an area called the hyoid bone, and it's a small bone in front of the trachea. And we're looking, if there's a strangulation that occurs, that bone is fractured due to the pressure that's placed on the person that's doing the strangulation. And when the doctor was able to move back the tissue and the muscle and get to that area, he immediately said, you have a fractured hyoid bone, and this is a strangulation case. You have a homicide.
And it was at the autopsy with Dr. Davis that Detective Crawley and Detective Grice, my brother, informed us, hey, we're working a homicide now, and let's activate everybody. Monday morning got pretty busy. really quickly.
In Springfield, Oregon, police are investigating the mysterious death of 48-year-old Army veteran Donna Berry, who was found at the Village Inn.
I wanted to contact Donna's family to have a conversation with them about what happened.
He wanted to answer any questions we had, and which I thought that was just wonderful of him. And I didn't want to believe it was true. He said she definitely put up a fight. I never felt the pain like it in my life. I hope I don't never have to. Well, I have had to feel it again several times since then, but it's awful. It's just like a big void in your chest. Real painful. Physically painful. She was the baby girl. She had 2 older sisters and 2 brothers. There was Jenny, Kathy, Donna, Jamie, and Casey. She was something else. Spoiled. She was the favorite. She was a bright light. You had no choice but to look at her when she walked into a room. Her and Mom was a lot alike. All we have to do is look at each other and we'd know what we was thinking, and go laughing. Like we could read each other's mind.
I had been in my 20s when we actually became friends and got to hang out with each other. She was, she was fun, nice, free-spirited, life of the party. Well, we all used to go out and dance, go to clubs, and just hang out, and barbecues, and family gatherings, and get-togethers, and it was just, weekend barbecue. And it was nice. Go swimming, go to the creek, go to the river. That's what we did. She loved youngins. She raised my niece's 2 kids, Christian and Corley, along with her own.
Donna had been married to Chuck, who passed away in 2010.
All the women in Johns County just loved Chuck. He was a singer, played guitar. He's a tall, skinny Indian, Choctaw Indian. He was good looking, but all the women in Johns County was after him.
When Chuck died, things kind of all went to after that. It's almost like she kind of, I don't know, she was still Donna, but that's when the drugs come in, and it's almost like she lost a big part of something that meant something.
She had served her country for 27 years, with 23 of those years on active duty.
They wanted to let us know, this is how we remember Donna. We want you to remember Donna this way too. And that helped reset me. It's easy to fall into this faceless investigation sometimes, not remembering the human being behind it. And that really reminded me, we are here to investigate somebody's daughter and somebody's sister's murder.
She loved the Army. She was a veteran of foreign war. She wanted to be a part of something where she could learn something from it. She teached mechanics. She'd tell me that if the men would only read the instructions, they wouldn't need her. Her kid and her nieces and nephews was number one in her life, She wanted to make a lot of money so she could do for them. And she did, too, what she could. They all thought at the time she was a little bit too strict, but when they look back on it now, they appreciate her for being that way. Everything she did with them in mind.
Donna's family was able to tell detectives that Donna's boyfriend was a man called Jonathan Folks.
I worked domestic violence cases exclusively for 2 years. I saw a lot of strangulation cases, and as soon as we saw that, our focus really became, we need to find a boyfriend that was out here.
November 2014. Police in Springfield, Oregon are investigating the murder of 48-year-old Army veteran Donna Perry. They are looking for Jonathan Folks, her boyfriend, who was missing since the night of her murder.
He had some juvenile history involving drug crimes, drug abuse. Locally, he didn't have any priors. He wasn't in our system. And that's the other challenge in working this case. When you're dealing with a victim and a suspect who are not from our area, this was a complete unknown. We didn't know anything about either of them aside from what their coworkers were telling us. We didn't have a criminal history background. We weren't able to compare notes from prior calls for service to indicate there was other disputes, there's drug abuse, there's domestic violence angles. So it made it a little more complicated to build a good picture of who he was.
Jonathan Folks is a 25-year-old male, so 20-plus year age difference. But by all accounts, Jonathan loves Donna, and Jonathan's just a little bit more invested in the relationship than Donna was.
She brought him to the house, and I met him. He just seemed like a real quiet, and he was real jealous, too. Always questioning her about maybe a phone call, or she'd go to the bathroom, you know. Be like he'd almost want to wait outside the door for her. Kind of crazy. And I'd say something to her about it. She said, "I know, Mother," and just laugh. I said, "Okay."
When they started seeing each other, our kids were hanging out, and I'd go pick them up and bring them to my house, and we just didn't really hang out as much anymore because, you know, she had her fella and I had the kids, or either she'd have the kids and I'd be at home. And but I remember the day they left, she come by my house and said they were headed out, and that's the last I seen her.
Donna and her boyfriend had traveled from Mississippi to Oregon.
They were here for about a month. Everybody that was here on this work crew is from Mississippi and were familiar with each other, most of them having worked with each other in the past.
We started tracking down all of Donna Perry's co-workers, and that was quite a chore to do. The company that brought Donna Perry and her co-workers out had set their employees up at 3 different motels in Springfield. We'd send a team of detectives out to one hotel and go knock on doors and figure out who works for this company and ask them what they know about Donna Perry and her boyfriend that we can't seem to locate.
Oddly enough, the only people at this motel from that work crew were Donna and her boyfriend Jonathan. They were staying at another motel in town with the rest of the crew. However, they were asked to leave due to reasons management didn't want them there. There was some disruptive things going on, whether it's parties, and Miss Perry and her boyfriend were asked to go to another motel.
What I learned was Jonathan had only lasted a couple of weeks in his employment and was soon relieved of his duties. I think he resigned in lieu of firing. He was using controlled substances on the job. And that left a lot of responsibility to his girlfriend, Donna. Donna is the main breadwinner, and Jonathan is hugely dependent on Donna for transportation, for use of a cell phone, and for financial help. In speaking with other co-workers to these two, I located one who was actually a half-brother of Donna Perry, and her half-brother, Keith, is from Mississippi as well, and he worked for the same company, but he and Donna weren't exactly close for the past several years, so they end up working on the same project in Springfield, and Keith moves in with Donna and Jonathan Folks for a period of 4 days between November 16th and November 20th. During that time, Keith reports to me that he is noticing some issues with Jonathan Folks. A, that he is using drugs, specifically methamphetamine.
He became jealous. He acted erratically and upset. He was easily upset by Miss Perry and other people hanging out with her. He didn't like other people being around her. And they indicated they saw more tension in the relationship between Mr. Folks and Miss Perry. As time went on, there was more and more tension, and people were observing they didn't seem compatible together. They didn't have a lot in common. And Mr. Folks became more withdrawn from them, more withdrawn from Miss Perry, and delved deeper into drug abuse while he was here, specifically methamphetamine.
Anytime that Donna is away from the motel, Jonathan is frantic. He is known to pace back and forth, that he mumbles and mutters to himself, and it's clear that Jonathan is very possessive and jealous of anything that Donna does outside of his presence. And so Keith only lasts 4 days in this motel room because he says, I moved back to another motel with other coworkers just to get away from Donna and Jonathan constantly bickering, and Jonathan kind of being a pest. Keith tells me that Jonathan would follow Donna around kind of like a lost puppy, and that he would constantly ask, where is Donna? When is she coming back? Who's she with? Those types of issues that we typically see in domestic violence type situations. Jonathan was checking all those boxes.
This was an imbalanced relationship that was marked by Jonathan Folks' jealousy, his persistent paranoia regarding Miss Perry and what she was up to and who she was with, and a general panic whenever she wasn't around him, because she had gone out without him on November 22nd. He presumably did not know where she was, and we can make this presumption because he called many times. He called her over and over again, and she didn't answer. We know this from the cell phone records. One can infer that he is becoming increasingly distraught at her not answering the phone, and he's getting into this state that her half-brother had described seeing him in. Both of these people associated with the motel room were out with a work crew from Mississippi. They had friends and associates that came out with them that had spent their evenings socializing with them and were familiar with what they were planning to do. And the plan was that these two were going to drive back to Mississippi together on November 23rd. November 23rd is the day that the police found the body.
Police believe the victim's boyfriend, Jonathan Folks, has escaped in her car and is on the run.
Where Mr. Folks lived, he lived outside of a community in Mississippi called Hattiesburg, Mississippi. We had a pretty good indicator that Mr. Folks was going home. We knew he was from there. We thought there's a pretty good chance he's going home. So I made a decision to place a phone call. I spoke with his stepfather and I spoke with his mother on the phone. And I called to let them know that Miss Perry had been killed, and I was concerned for Mr. Folks. I didn't know where his whereabouts were. I was concerned he knew what happened or was potentially a victim himself, and I reached out to the parents and said, please give me a call and let me know if Jonathan shows up at home. I need to know if he's safe or what happened to him.
We put what's called a All Points Bulletin, APB, or a BOLO, there's different terms, be on the lookout in the nationwide law enforcement system, saying we're looking for this car. We knew Miss Perry's car was missing. We knew Mr. Folks was unaccounted for. So we put something nationwide to everybody saying, if you come across this car, contact me or Springfield Police Department, myself, or Detective Grice immediately. If you come across Mr. Folks, contact us immediately. However, we don't have probable cause to arrest Mr. Folks at this point, but we really needed to know his whereabouts and where the whereabouts of the car were. So that bulletin went out in the system, and then we went back to work on background, search warrants, examining cell phones, talking to family, talking to friends, waiting for Mr. Folks to pop up somewhere. I suspected he was making his way back to Mississippi because based on the phone conversation I had with his mother, she expected him to be coming back. And this was time of year, it was around Thanksgiving. So she was hopeful he would make his way back by Thanksgiving that week. There was a lot of waiting and hoping somebody came across him and let us know they found him. And then lo and behold, we got a couple phone calls.
We were really in the dark until we got a call from Louisiana State Highway Patrol. And they let us know that they had just pulled over Jonathan Folks in Donna Perry's vehicle and had let him go. And we were happy about that. It's a gamble when you have law enforcement not from the originating agency of a warrant or a BOLO. Sometimes it's a little bit risky to put somebody with no knowledge of a case right in front of a suspect and start asking questions. So we wanted to avoid that. We weren't worried that Jonathan Folks is a serial killer who's been knocking people off along this 2,500-mile road trip. We really wanted to confirm that he was going back to his home and that we would know where to go once we arrived in Mississippi. And so we get the hit from Louisiana State Patrol, and they let Jonathan Folks continue on his route, which was consistent with he's driving right up to the Hattiesburg-Laurel area. And then about an hour later, we got another hit from Pearl River County Sheriff's Office, which is just south of Hattiesburg, Mississippi. And they let us know that they had pulled over Jonathan Folks because they got a license plate reader hit when Jonathan Folks crossed from Louisiana into Mississippi. And so kind of the same scenario. They pull over Jonathan Folks and call us afterwards and say, hey, we just talked to your suspect. They sent us the dash cam video of that stop, and we confirmed, yes, on that video, that is definitely Jonathan Folks, and that's Donna Perry's car. And what's also interesting is the sheriff's office on that stop saw a purse in the passenger side floorboard and remarked about that purse, saying, well, you're driving solo, Jonathan. Do you have a purse? And he made mention that that purse belonged to his girlfriend, and the sheriff's office took that purse for safekeeping. So we have a piece of evidence out of that vehicle, but Jonathan is back on his way, continuing north to where his family lives.
I had spoken with Jonathan's mother on the phone and let her know, hey, by the way, Jonathan was pulled over not far from your home, and I suspect he's going to be home soon. There's a lot of ways to investigate a case, and a lot of times it's important to withhold as much information as possible, specifically about the crime scene and the manner of death, cause of death, because only one person should know that, the suspect. Not telling his parents was a tactical decision on my part because I needed to let them know initially we're worried about him and we're investigating a crime that occurred, and I just need to make sure he was okay, and I would reach out to him at a later point to talk to him about what happened. He made his way back, and she let us know he made his way home. And I didn't really say much else except to say I'll be in touch more later. We're going to keep on doing our investigation. We were concerned about him acting erratically, and when those instances come up, if he acts erratically like that and his mother or his father confront him about something, they're potential future victims. If he's already killed one person because of a dispute, because of an interpersonal disagreement, and if he's already demonstrated that volatility, I was concerned if mom or dad confronted him about why the police want to talk to you about Donna, they are potential victims of crime, whether it's a kidnapping, whether it's a hostage situation, or a murder. It's important that he feels he's in a safe place because he's more likely to stay put there. If he thinks we're looking for him as a murder suspect, he's not likely to stick around. He's more likely to flee, and apprehending him is going to be a much bigger challenge.
Detectives had Folks where they felt they could get to him, but a call with his brother reinforced their belief that time was of the essence.
I'm concerned for his safety and the safety of others. I am too, if that's how he's behaving. Are you worried about your family at all while he's at home?
He's super paranoid.
The decision was made. That came in on a Wednesday, and we knew it's time to start buying plane tickets.
Detectives have tracked Donna's boyfriend and their suspect, Jonathan Folks, to his home in Hattiesburg, Mississippi.
Detective Dan Grice was my partner, and we worked this up to that point. His brother Dave worked as a detective with us also.
I made a pitch, and it was right in front of my brother, and he knew where I was going with that, but I thought, here's a chance. I said, I went to school in Hattiesburg, and I'm very familiar with that area, and I think I could be of use. And the chief agreed with me, and my brother was not happy. He wanted to go on that trip, and I understand why.
He was actually very familiar with the area. He knew the town, he knew the rural area, some of the jurisdictions, and it felt like he was the right person to bring back. If I needed to be driving somewhere strange once we landed, he was the person to get us there. So Detective Dave Grice and I booked a series of flights to get us across the country. We ended up getting in probably about 2 a.m. We checked in a motel ourselves in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, got some rest for a couple hours, and then we went to work of see if we can make our way out and contact Mr. Folks and find out what happened. As we're on our way, I get a phone call from my dispatcher in Oregon saying, hey, I've got a deputy sheriff on the line from Mississippi. They just got a phone call from Jonathan's father saying he would like the police to come out to the house. And part of me says I couldn't believe my luck, but part of me was really suspicious of that, what that meant. So we drove as fast as we could to get to Jonathan's parents' house.
Detective Grice and Crowley go to Jonathan's family home, where they meet his stepfather, Bobby Mitchell.
We asked Bobby Mitchell, hey, when did he get home? Oh, he got home on Wednesday evening. And what did he say about what happened? Well, he hasn't told me anything, but he told his mom and he told his brother what he did. And we said, well, where's the mom and where's the brother? The brother wasn't there at the property. He was away at college at that time. And the mother was at work that day. And we said, where does mom work? And he gave us directions. So I really casually said, thank you, appreciate it. We'll be on our way. Let me know if Jonathan wants to talk. We made our way down the end of the driveway. It's a long, rural driveway. Nodded over to the deputy to come over and talk to us. I told the deputy, hey, we need to talk to Mom. Can you help us get there? We need to get there quick. And we drove to where Jonathan Folks' mom worked. And we interviewed her on the front porch of the facility where she worked. I introduced myself and say, hey, I'm George. I'm a detective from Oregon. I really would like to talk to you about what happened. We are investigating the murder of Donna Perry, and I'm concerned that Jonathan may know about what happened or something. And my understanding is he told you what happened. And by the look on her face, I knew she was about to share some really dark secrets. It had to have been one of the toughest moments in her life. And that's the first time we heard what happened in that motel room with Donna and Jonathan. She said he's been declining mentally to the point where he gets really frustrated and angry. She's concerned he may have undiagnosed mental illness. She said he's addicted to drugs and he's been acting a lot more irrational, and she was worried about him. She went on to describe that the fact that when Jonathan made his way back, he sat down with her and his brother. He and Donna had gotten into a physical dispute, and he told his mother that he strangled Donna. That was the moment that George and I both knew that we had probable cause to arrest Jonathan Folks for Donna Perry's murder.
And another surprise call confirms this for the detectives.
As we drove away from where Jonathan Folks' mother worked, we get a call from Jonathan's brother.
It was like 3 o'clock in the morning, so she came back home and they started having sex. And he said she was on top of him, and her demon
a demon face came over her. Her face turned into a demon. It's like he felt pain in his body, and so he began to, I guess what he thought would help is to just try to proclaim that he was a child of God and that she was of Satan. And I don't know, I guess he didn't go with the traditional trying to rebuke the demon out thing. I guess he was too scared. He doesn't understand, I guess, at that moment, or still doesn't. I don't know. He's kind of quiet. He doesn't talk about it anymore. He just kind of sleeps all day.
Did he describe to you what he did to kill her?
Yeah, he did. He said that he choked her.
That he choked her?
Yes.
And did he describe how he choked her or anything like that? Did he use something?
He didn't. He just said that he choked her.
The investigation into the murder of Donna Perry has taken a significant turn. Her boyfriend, Jonathan Folks, surfaces in his hometown of Hattiesburg, Mississippi, after confessing to his family. Detectives traveled to his parents' residence for a face-to-face confrontation.
We arrive at Jonathan Folks' residence, and he is inside the house, but Jonathan's brother and his father are outside, and we walk up, we make introductions with the brother. The brother confirms some of the information that the mother had already told us. We asked the family if Jonathan's willing to speak with us. We really would like to have some answers to what has been relayed to us today. And Jonathan's the only one who can tell us what really happened in that room. And the family soon retrieved Jonathan, and Jonathan came back out and sat on his front porch swing.
I said, do you mind if I record our conversation? I want this in your words. And he said, I don't mind, that's fine. Turned the recorder on, and I got a confession from Jonathan about what happened, what he did.
She was gone some hours, and eventually it was about 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning when she came back. And when she came back, anyway, had all the stuff ready, packed to leave. And anyway, we started making love. And then, while I was making love, it was like her face had changed, like it was evil. And anyway, and it felt like as if somebody had reached inside my leg and touched my hip and made it pop out of place. Anyway, I told her to quit doing that, and she was like, what? I said, putting up witchcraft on me. And she said in a sarcastic way, like, I don't know nothing about witchcraft. And the whole time she had that face. And then I came upon her and told her to stop, and then every time she would look at me in my eyes, like I got this evil presence over me, and I told her that I would hit her. And eventually I did. And then somehow, I don't know, we started fighting, and then I got up, and then we started choking each other. And then every time that I would call out to God to give me the strength, kill her, she got weaker and I got stronger. But every time I would doubt myself that God wasn't there for me, she would overcome me. But anyway, I killed her. Okay? And it just felt like, y'all know, it was like the right thing to do.
How do you feel about it now?
I don't like it at all. I don't think it was the right thing to do.
Why not?
I took a life. I don't want you to take a life.
Jonathan Folks agreed to be extradited to Springfield, Oregon.
He was indicted for murder of Donna Perry and for felony possession of methamphetamine.
As detectives prepare evidence for court, a clearer picture emerges of what occurred the night before Donna's murder.
Several people indicated that they had gone out with Miss Perry the night before. They went to a couple bars, they went shopping, hanging out with her. They had gone back to the room at some point and were hanging out in the room, and there was an argument, a dispute that took place between Miss Perry and Mr. Folks. And there were some jealous statements made and angry statements made by Mr. Folks at Miss Perry. But she decided she was going to go out with her friends that night and enjoy her last night in town because she was planning on leaving the next morning. And Mr. Folks did not go out with that group. He stayed back in the room.
Donna Perry arrived home around 5 a.m. And we know this from some cell phone records where we can infer that her message to another person that she got home safe meant she got back to the motel room. Around 8 a.m., neighbors heard a ruckus, what one of them described as sounding like a zoo was let loose in the floor above them or adjacent to them. And clearly, these things were the sound of the violent death that Ms. Perry suffered at the hands of Jonathan Folks.
Jonathan Folks faced trial before a judge and jury in Eugene, Oregon.
The arguments took a couple hours total between the both of us, and the jury returned a swift verdict of guilty on both counts. And in Oregon, the sentence for murder is life in prison with the possibility of parole at 25 years.
The verdict has delivered justice for Donna. But for her family, the pain of knowing that she's never coming back endures.
She was just full of life. She wanted to do for, everybody in the family, and just what stands out in my mind the most is just us laughing and talking, girl talk, and being together. Yeah, I really miss her.
If you ever met her, you wouldn't forget her. Yeah. Miss her a lot. Yeah.
We used to have card night, play cards. We don't do that no more. We used to have girls' night out. We don't do that no more. She was a good person.
When you looked in the trunk, describe it for me.
Well, my initial thought was, well, they did plastic back it, and I realized what it was, and it freaked me out. I closed the trunk and ran away.
The stench of rotting flesh is something that you'll never forget.
I pulled the blanket back, and I can see a naked man. He's hogtied. Whoever he is, he died a horrible death.
Was this some type of maybe cartel involvement here? Those thoughts are going through your mind.
The bedding, it was consistent with the type of linen that one might see at a motel.
I was able to plot out about half a dozen motels in the Corona area. We're just going to go out and do what investigators do, and that's just go knock on doors.
Gentleman looks back at us because you guys are here regarding the two dead bodies.
They laughed, these two dudes, straight up. I mean, no doubt in my mind. Straight up in that room. Who's they? Her and her old man.
Riverside County, California. August 29th, 2006, deputies are called to a remote area of the Gavilan Hills, where witness has discovered an abandoned vehicle. At the scene, police speak to the witness who discovered the vehicle and encounter a shocking scene.
When you looked in the trunk, describe it for me.
Well, my initial thought was, well, they did plastic bags. It basically, it looked like a foot or something. Just closed everything. I freaked out.
The person who discovered the car saw an opportunity, saw what looked like an abandoned car, looked inside, found some items, and thought that he would take them, make a little money off them, and then saw one of the bodies and got cold feet.
Once I closed everything, I thought, well, my fingerprints are all over this. So I ran up to the door and I wiped it with a towel, and then I go, I'm going to have to report this anyway.
He closed the trunk, put back everything he'd taken, kind of tried to wipe away his fingerprints a little bit so there'd be no evidence of him, and beat it the hell out of there and called 911.
I raced to my car and started up. I raced home as quickly as possible. And I ran up to my stepdad. I told him I found a dead body in the trunk. They called the police.
It's remote, but not far off the beaten path. A lot of times, vehicles get dumped up there that are stolen, perhaps stripped. His purpose in being around the car was suspect, of course, but nevertheless was truthful about the fact that he was in that car. But the real reason why he was there, I think he was just trying to rummage through it and make a quick getaway with a couple of things that he could get his hands on.
It was very hot. It was August in the summer, over 100 degrees. We all met at the command post, and then from there, the responding deputies gave us a brief, how they received the call, what they got, and how they approached the car. Next step is once we get briefed, we get a small team. It consists of the primary, which I was the primary investigator, your co-case agent, forensic technician, and the actual officer that approached the car.
And I remember when I pulled up on that day, the command post had been set up, the patrol units had blocked off the area, and when I met with our investigative team, the victim's car had been located over the little ridge over there, and we were talking with the gentleman who found the car. We had him over here near our command post, and we were talking with him as to what he saw and what he found and things like that. We traveled off on the side, and we just started to assess the scene. It was very important for us. We just didn't want to disturb any evidence of tire tracks or footprints that were in the area, so we navigated around and made our way to the vehicle. The odor of death was permeating the air. You just don't forget it.
So we get a game plan of where we're going to go, because we have to be out quite a bit outside the perimeter of the crime scene. We start taking photographs. It's called 8-point, and you shoot each side and each corner toward the opposite corner. And then we took pictures inside the vehicle. We opened the doors, took pictures inside the vehicle, and then we started documenting any evidence, shoe tracks, tire tracks that were in the dirt around the area.
We found several sets of shoe impressions, several sets of tire impressions. We compared those to the people that we knew had been in the scene, the person who reported it, the sheriff deputies who responded to it, and we eliminated them because we took pictures of their shoe marks, their tire treads, and we compared it to the impressions in the dirt. But we were left with 2 people and 1 vehicle that were unknown. We looked in the trunk, and I pulled the blanket back, and I can see a naked man, face down. He's hogtied, his hands and feet behind his back, and he has all this stuff around his face, and it's just random stuff. It's plastic bags and leather belts and electrical cords and telephone cords, and there's a black bra, and all of this stuff just wrapped around his face, and he's also gagged, and I just thought, you know, my God, this guy, whoever he is, he died a horrible death.
One of the items that we saw was pink duct tape. I had never seen pink duct tape before. This was the first time I had ever seen pink duct tape. And the electrical cords were very long in nature. One appeared to be a vacuum cleaner cord. And I remember it specifically because it was a long cord. It was a corrugated thick rubber casing. And I know that because I had just replaced the vacuum cleaner cord on my own vacuum cleaner. And we examined the sheets and the comforter blankets, and they were just very plain, general, like white, beige wrapping.
By looking at it, I was telling everyone at the scene, I was saying, something, this looks like motel sheets. And we kind of looked at it, so we take photographs, and then from there, we start peeling off the layers.
When we pulled this body up out of the trunk to further examine him, I looked back in the trunk and said, oh my God, there's another body in there.
We couldn't believe it. It was like, what? There's another body in here? It's just a shock. You wouldn't think there'd be enough room for another body in there.
It's another male, but he's smaller. This guy's face up, but he's also naked, he's hogtied, and he's got the same type of just random stuff wrapped around his face. Being hogtied just makes it, that much more awful.
Every day is a surprise. Something you don't see very often in crime scenes.
Since the car had been exposed to the heat of the summer's day, this had sped up the decomposition of the two bodies found in the trunk.
They're in such bad shape that the investigators thought they'd been dead for several days, when in fact it may only have been a day or even less. In the trunk of that car, in that heat, there wasn't much, I suppose, to be admired or regarded in what was left of them.
After the initial work at the Gavilan Hills crime scene, the bodies are transported to the coroner's office for autopsies.
Each of the bodies was put into a plastic coroner's zipped-up body bag, sealed with a number on it, a tag for the coroner's office, and then put into the coroner's van and transported to the morgue. During the autopsy, we finally get to collect all the bindings and the things that were wrapped around. We get to see the body once it's washed and clean, and we can see there are no gunshot wounds. There are no stab wounds. By the end of the autopsy, the forensic pathologist determined that both victims died of asphyxiation from the items that were wrapped around their faces.
But the identities of the two men were unknown.
It was apparent that they were probably Hispanic, so nothing else to really tell us who they were, where they worked, where they lived, anything like that.
There was no identifying information. There was no license identification, nothing to give us who the identity was of these people. So first and foremost in the investigation, who are they?
Homicide detectives from Riverside County Sheriff's Office are trying to identify two men found murdered and stuffed in the trunk of a car in the Gavilan Hills.
One of the key pieces of evidence that we had there was the vehicle. It was a Honda Accord, and we had a license plate number that had registration information on that vehicle. So I was tasked with find out who the registered owner is of this vehicle so that we could at least go and try and contact them.
The registered owner said, I sold that car. They went to the next person. I sold that car. And finally, they came to the owner of the car who had lent it to his friends so they could go to the bar the day or so before. And that man said that he'd reported the car stolen because what had his friends done with it? Where had it gone? So then that's when the names came up, the names of the victims, and they could begin to track down what had happened to them hour by hour.
The other residents of the house are able to identify the victims as Milton Chavez and his friend Marvin Gabriel. Both are from Guatemala.
They did have friends, people that they lived with, that they worked with. I believe Marvin had a girlfriend at the time. So they did have a connection up here with people that they were close to, that were very moved by this whole incident.
¿Qué clase de persona era Marvin? Buena gente. Buena gente. Sí, se lleva bien con todos. Bromistas, todos. Éramos solo Marvin, Byron, Milton, o sea, todo el grupo, pues que tenemos un grupo de trabajo. Y todos, buena, o sea, nunca hubieron problemas, nunca comemos juntos.
In my career, I've investigated people who were millionaires that were murdered to a homeless person that was murdered. I don't think they're, only because they're migrant workers or not documented workers, they're treated any different. I give them the same 110% effort no matter what. And that was my belief, and that was the belief of our team.
Milton Chavez and Martin Gabriel were working on construction in Riverside County, out in the Inland Empire near Corona, with the waves of immigrants coming north to find work, to get work, to support their families, send money back to their families. They don't trust banks. And they may not even be able to open bank accounts because they are not in this country legally. So they may carry around a lot of cash. They may have to live 8, 10, 12 people in a house or an apartment because they can't afford any other living circumstances. You find that their very status, not here legally necessarily, vulnerability opens them up to all sorts of crimes of predation.
The register owner told us that Milton and Marvin were last seen on Sunday, and they went to a bar in the Riverside area. And after the bar, they were supposed to come home, and they never came home.
Behind us is the bar where the two victims ended up going that night. El Paradiso was the name, and now it's called Club El Rio. The day that we came, you have your regulars in there. Investigator Martinez and I, we came and we showed pictures of both the victims, and they identified, yes, he was here.
In addition to the lead to the El Paradiso bar, the victims' friends were able to provide another vital clue.
Milton Chavez and Martin Gabriel borrowed a friend's cell phone. The next day, the owner of the phone finds that he's not heard from these guys, doesn't know what happens, calls his own phone number, and a woman answers the phone, which should not be happening. And later in the day, he called, and a man whose voice he didn't know answered the phone. At that point, he thought the phone had been stolen, and he cut off service altogether.
So based on that, we wrote search warrants for the records of that phone and determined that that phone had pinged off of a cell tower in the Corona area. We speculated that it was from a motel based on the items of evidence. So Robert Masson tasked me with finding all hotel motels within about a 5-mile radius of this cell tower. I was able to plot out about half a dozen motels in the area of the cell tower. Made some maps, and we decided that we're just going to go out and do what investigators do, and that's just go knock on doors.
We're in the city of Corona right now. Corona's in one of many cities within Riverside County. They have their own police department, so the sheriff's department doesn't patrol out here unless, we're called for assistance or anything. Not a bad place to live. I mean, like any other cities, it has its good places and bad places.
We had a list of hotels that we were going to contact the management and just to see if we can determine where the victims, if they had been at these locations or not.
Each one we went there just to find out, did you have any sheets stolen? Did you have any comforters stolen? Did you have any lamps damaged? Did you have any vacuum cleaners that were damaged? We drew a blank. We visited half a dozen locations out in the general Corona area around that cell tower.
At the end of the day, we were done. We hit every motel that was on our list, but on the way back to the office, all of a sudden, Detective Martinez kind of made a hard left turn into what was the National Motel. And we followed, and when we got out, we're like, what the hell were you doing? Or what's going on? And I was like, this place wasn't on the list.
It was not on Google Maps. probably because it was just a motel that's been there for a while that nobody really goes to. It's a steamy little motel. We walk up to the clerk's window, which has metal bars in it, which obviously is a sign that type of clientele that they serve. And we identify ourselves as investigators and that we were looking to find if he had been the victim of any type of vandalism in any of his rooms or any electrical lamps or vacuum cleaners that were stolen from his room.
We're at the National Inn, Corona, and it looks the same. Same paint, doors, same color.
There's a number of different motels in the area. When you're driving around, it just wasn't on the radar for whatever reason.
We showed up that day, pulled in, and we went over to the office and talked to the clerk and asked him, hey, if you had some people tearing up the rooms or you had missing linen and destroyed property, vandalism. And he said, told us that, he just threw out a couple people out from the room 114.
He said they stole the comforters, they broke my vacuum cleaner, they stole the cord off of it, but they wanted to borrow the other one, but they broke the handle on this other vacuum cleaner, but they fixed it with pink duct tape. And the look on our faces between Robert Masson and Ron Waters and myself, our jaws dropped. Because now that was the second time I'd ever seen pink duct tape.
Riverside County Sheriff's detectives believe the National Inn on South Lincoln Avenue was a location where Guatemalan natives Milton Chavez and Marvin Gabriel were killed. A man working at the motel told investigators that he had recently thrown out a couple for trashing one of the rooms.
It was room 114. We said, can we go take a look at it? He said, sure. As an investigator, that's great, because that means that we could try and collect maybe some other sources of trace evidence in that room.
From that point, he directed us to room 114, which is back in the corner here. So we're just kind of walking casually along the sidewalk, being escorted.
At the room, Detective Ron Waters speaks to the new resident of the room, a man called Scott.
Ended up going inside, and that's where we found Scott, who was actually down on his hands. He's doing some work on electrical outlet, and he turned back and looked, and that's when he mentioned, oh, you guys must be here for the 2 dead bodies.
We had that look on our face where he kind of said, uh-oh. I probably stuck a foot in my mouth, and we're like, we need to talk to you. So we ended up talking to him. He says, I'm trying to get the room cleaned up to move my family into this room. I wasn't involved. Ended up being a key witness.
What do you know? That they want to up to do tricks, got things out of control. This is what I thought they were bro. Trying to impress me. Black dude and his old lady.
Okay.
Really?
So they lured them in here?
That's what I heard, and they took them out and wrapped in dollies.
The 2 people that were in this room before, a male and a female. The female, her name was Crazy, but she had 2 other friends with her. Another black female and another black male named Omar.
They picked him up under the pretense that she was in a cellar to these dudes. What did they want? Somewhere on 6, I think. Somewhere on 6? Mm-hmm.
Now what happened? They strangled the son of a with pillowcases on the bed. They were getting in a fight. Trippy said back and forth right in front of me.
Who's they?
Her and her old man.
You're talking about Crazy?
Yeah, Crazy and her old man.
The girl's called Crazy?
Crazy, I don't know her real name. She's a big girl, and I let her come up into my room. I didn't know the extent of what the I didn't even know they'd been involved in that. I know she'd been bragging about some
that prior to that, I told you I didn't believe it. They whacked these two dudes straight up. I mean, no doubt in my mind. Straight up in that room.
We're pretty comfortable that we're in the right place. We've got the right room, and we secure the location. And then we start making phone calls to our supervisor, our forensic technicians, to start moving our way so we get processing. That is what we think is our main scene.
The investigating team had made a major breakthrough. It appeared the room had been left in disarray by Crazy.
There were obvious signs of ripped out wires, phone lines that were consistent with the items retrieved from the victims' bodies. A lot of damage there. There was actually some of the pink duct tape inside the room to tape up cords or maybe a hole in the wall. There was blood, a lot of blood evidence that you couldn't see with the eye, but was there. So another thing that I collected was huge swaths of carpet from the room as well. In addition to that room, I processed the maid's quarters, and the blankets were all very consistent with what the victims were found wrapped in and bound with.
Investigators then spoke to Scott's girlfriend, who was living in the room with them.
She provided us some images because we didn't have a whole lot of pictures of Crazy. And she gave us a camera, and they had taken some pictures amongst themselves, so now we had an image.
This girl wouldn't, hesitate at all to hurt me. I mean, I'm, looking over my shoulder.
Are you afraid of her?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm packing my stuff and moving my daughter and myself somewhere that's safe.
And with that information, based on the information we had from the crime scene, the evidence we had at the National Inn Motel, the information we had from Scotty, we were able to secure arrest warrants for the arrest of Omar Hutchinson and Franchon Epps and Crazy.
Riverside County, California, 2006, detectives investigating the murders of 2 Guatemalan construction workers have identified the lead suspects from witnesses at the motel in Corona. They are now on the trail of Omar Hutchinson, Franchon Epps, and Brooke Rodiers, also known as Crazy.
She was tough. She would carry a refrigerator, a small little refrigerator, carry it around like nothing. I know she was from the Norco area, and we contacted her mother, and I'm trying to downplay it because I want her mom to tell me where she's at. And I asked her, I said, listen, Brooke probably got herself in some trouble here. We need to talk to her.
I know it's probably not her. You don't know that. Well, you don't know that. You know, she's a tough cookie. Yeah.
She's very street savvy.
Very street smart.
And she's very good with her work.
There's a picture of her.
Yeah, she knows how to work it.
Her mom told me straight out, Investigator Masson, you have to be careful with my daughter. She'll hurt you. Don't trust her at all.
By virtually every account, Brooke Rodiers was a dangerous, dangerous woman. She was a big woman, 6 feet, 200 pounds. She looked menacing. She had a deathly stare. She'd been evicted several times from motel rooms because she'd trashed the places. And as we know from the description of the murders, she'd pulled phone cords out of the wall, pulled cords out of vacuum cleaners to use them to hogtie her victims. So this is a person who exuded a sense of danger.
We have an Inland Regional Apprehension Team called IREP. On that team, we have a sheriff's investigator and we have an FBI agent. And they use unconventional resources to track people within the area. So we gave them the information along with their physical description, pictures, and the arrest warrant. And the members of the Inland Regional Apprehension Team successfully located Omar Hutchinson and Brooke Rodiers. Anfrench and Epps in the Orange County area, and they were able to take them into custody successfully without incident.
One of the officers, one of the detectives on that unit tells me, yes, I had Brooke in my car. I turned out my recorder to have it running, and she pretty much tells me, I wasn't involved in this. I know who was involved, and I'm scared for my life. I don't want to tell you who it is, who done this, but it wasn't me. There was other people, and I'm scared for my life that if I say something, they're going to come after me and my family.
Detectives finally get to confront their main suspect and the man they believe was her accomplice.
She's in a holding cell in one of the interview rooms. Omar is in the other room also. We sit there and we're like, let's talk to her first. She's going to roll over on everything.
You have kind of a reputation of being a tough girl and stuff like that, but nothing of, of this magnitude of what's going on. Do you wish to talk to me? Huh? You don't want to talk? Okay.
She was indifferent. She was very cold. Not a care in the world. I felt like we were inconveniencing her. I didn't see any remorse in her at all.
I'm sorry, what?
There's no way I can get a sleep.
Where are they?
They're in that person on my pocket.
Okay. We'll go from there.
She's done with her cigarette, and we're like, you ready? You want to go talk? And she's like, no, I don't want. I want my lawyer. That was the last time.
After Brooke requests an attorney, detectives have to stop interviewing her, so they return to the National Inn on South Lincoln Avenue to follow up on a significant witness statement regarding the night of the murder.
A woman staying in the same motel as Rodiers said that Rodiers had told her what she had done and that she kind of liked it.
They said on a day, Brooke came over to our room, knocked on our door with her two kids and said, could you just take care of them? And literally before they said anything, she dropped her children off and ran back into the room. And we asked them, well, what happened? She said, well, we always heard them screaming, yelling at each other. They always fought. We thought they were just having a fight because that was pretty much their lifestyle.
It is unusual to have female suspects involved in murder. A lot of the female suspects that we have are domestic violence related. And in this particular case, it just led me to believe how vicious and this particular individual was.
We did a little background on Omar. Omar was supposed to be this bad gang member, and everyone talked big about him. He was bad dude. Everything on the street, he's bad dude. So I'm thinking to myself, she's already invoked. She doesn't want to talk to us. And I'm thinking, going in this interview, everything I've heard from him, I'm just going to go in and talk to him, see what's going on.
Corona, California. Detectives investigating the murder of migrant workers Marvin Gabriel and Milton Chavez have arrested Omar Hutchison. His girlfriend and the chief suspect in the murders, Brooke Rodiers, refused to talk and asked for an attorney.
So I go in, I talk to him, I explain to him, who I am. Investigator Masson with the Central Homicide Unit. I need to talk to you about an incident that occurred at the National Inn Motel. So I read him his rights. And very surprised where he said, yeah, I understand my rights and I want to talk to you guys.
Omar Hutchison speaks to the detectives and reveals more information about what happened on the night of August 28th.
So on this particular Saturday, Milton and Marvin, they had received their paycheck. They wanted to go and have a night out on the town. They decided to go to El Paraíso Bar, which is a very popular establishment for migrant workers in the area. And what we had determined was that Brooke was also there at the bar and used that bar to pick up guys and turn tricks because she was a prostitute.
She was blonde, When she was arrested, she dyed her hair black. But during all this, what was going on during the homicide, she was blonde. So 6 foot tall blonde walking into a place like that gets a lot of attention.
Brooke, Melvin, and Marvin had agreed to go back to the hotel. What we believed was for some type of prostitution services between all three. So we later learned that as Brooke brought both of Melvin and Marvin into the room, Omar Hutchinson was in the room along with Franchon Epps and waiting for them.
What time is it?
It's already late.
Late?
Yeah.
About late, like morning late or?
Like 1:32, like club lit out late. Like,
club, okay.
Like around that area. And then that's when like, I don't even remember how I got to the door. Going to the door. I go inside.
Brooke's there.
Franchon's here. The little dude.
Little dude.
Right there.
Okay.
The bigger one standing on the carpet.
Okay.
Right there. They're naked, so I would figure they just either out, so at least she slept with or Franchon stripped. Now that makes sense. They were naked though. That's an argument started right there because he's questioning her on who I am. I'm like, who are you two? You know, so I'm like, hell. Then I know he kind of like snatches her up, kind of like grabbing her. I'm like, are you cheating on something? Mm-hmm. And then she kind of tells me, don't worry about it. That's when she starts telling me about the chick thing and everything.
Okay.
She said, I just want to take this money.
Omar tells the detectives that Milton and Marvin were not as submissive as their attackers had expected them to be.
These two, they're not gonna be victims at this point. They actually fight back. I mean, there's a pretty good fight going on. Furniture being thrown around, yelling, shouting, cursing, being slammed into the walls.
And I believe during that fight, Brooke ended up sustaining an injury, and she got so upset that these guys were actually fighting back.
And then he started fighting back, and that's how I think that's how I think she got the stab because she already had this.
Mm-hmm. Well, who had a knife?
Dude had a knife.
Okay.
So I'm saying like, where'd that come from? She didn't want me to see it because she didn't want me to act up.
Uh-huh.
So I ended up acting up anyway because dude started talking in my house. I'm like, hell no.
Mm-hmm.
She's sitting there the whole time, Franchon with the gun the whole damn time. But she's not saying anything or doing. She's just standing there with it pointing.
They ended up tying him. She ended up getting so upset that these guys were fighting back that she put her foot on her mouth and smothered them to death.
She starts mashing her feet against their faces, not just once or twice, but over and over. At one point, in order to make sure that she's not slipping, she braces herself against the door or the wall to be sure that her feet are firmly pressed into the faces of one of these men. The men are, of course, panicking. They're crying. One of them is pleading, please, please. Another one is on his knees praying. They sense what's coming and that there's no way out. This is more than just a robbery. This is sadism.
Does he have anything wrapped around his neck or his throat or his head?
My belt.
Which one's that? On the big guy or the small guy?
Well, the big guy was just lying down.
Okay.
It looked like the phone cord or something.
Okay.
Or the bag there. One of the two. It was a cord though.
Okay.
Sometimes when happens and it's out of control, sometimes die.
It seems that once Brooke Rogers decided that these men would wind up dead, that was going to happen. There was no way they were going to get out of that situation. And Mr. Chavez was 5 feet 2 inches tall. He weighed 105, 110, 115 pounds. His body was put in the trunk first, and then the Brooke Rogers complained that she couldn't get the larger man's body. He was maybe 5'8", and asked for the motel luggage dolly so she could move his body out to the trunk of that borrowed car.
She ties them up, they wrap them up in blankets, and pretty much she puts the bodies on a dolly. Brooke takes them to the victim's cars. She opens up the trunk and puts the bodies in the trunk. It's quite a ways from the motel to Gavilan Hills, probably about 20, 30 miles. And they drove up there, and the only reason that the car was where it was located was that she ran off the road and she got the car stuck in an embankment. I'm pretty sure that taking that bodies way deeper into that canyon and probably would have dumped them on the side of the road to use their car to drive out of there.
I have had bodies in the trunk, but never two. If you were to ask me, do you remember the case in your career where there were two bodies in the trunk? I'd know which case you were talking about. This is the only one that I had like this.
It's 2010 in Riverside County, California. The trial of Brooke Rogers, Omar Hutchinson, Franchune Epps, all accused of the brutal murders of migrant workers, Marvin Gabriel and Milton Chavez, is about to begin.
We put the case together, and now we present it to the DA's office. Their MO was to go to the migrant bars, pick up migrant workers, who a lot of them were documented, rob them because they knew that they weren't going to report it. Brooke, before this killing, was actually convicted for the same crime, that she picked up a male, took him to a motel, stole everything, and he reported that to the police, and she was actually arrested and was given probation.
As you can imagine, we had 3 defendants, which meant that each defendant had their own defense team. The case was prosecuted, and it was a lengthy trial, but in the end, we were able to get a successful prosecution on all 3 of them.
Even the judge down the road said this went well beyond. You could have killed the men fairly quickly if that was what you wanted to do. This was not a transactional crime where you hold the guys up, you take their money, and then you kill them to silence them. There was something else going on with this woman, with the rage and the fury in this woman, who called herself crazy. We shouldn't be surprised about any of this. But the brutality of it, the sadism of it, was just beyond the pale. It was an appalling thing to do. These men suffered a long time and a lot.
Brooke Rogers, Omar Hutchinson, and Franchune Epps were all found guilty for the murders of Marvin Gabriel and Milton Chavez. Hutchinson and Epps received life in prison without parole, while Rogers was sentenced to death.
The death penalty is meted out fairly rarely in California, but it hasn't been carried out since the year 2006. Death row for women in California is at a prison in Chowchilla in the Central Valley. And it's a little different for women. They have more freedom of access. They have their own exercise yard, the women on death row. They can do hobbies. They can do crafts. They can take college courses by mail. They have a little more privilege, a little fewer strings, because they've shown themselves in the past to be less violent and less confrontational. And as I was reading about this, I really wondered whether Brooke Rogers would be the exception to that.
I wasn't surprised to learn that a woman was involved because of the women's underwear that were found at the scene. For a woman to kill 2 men in such a brutal way, no stab wounds, no gunshots, they weren't beaten to death, they were just simply hogtied and suffocated. You don't have too many murder cases where a woman is the prime suspect, especially a murder that is this brutal.
If Detective Martinez wouldn't have made that left turn and wouldn't have recognized it, could have had a different outcome. I'm very satisfied that we're able to solve that. And again, you could take it further that there could have been potential victims. We prevented this from happening too. We're able to locate the scene where this occurred. We were able to put everything together, arrest the suspects responsible for this and take them to court and successfully prosecute them, they'll never get out of jail at this point.
When you commit a crime in Riverside County, the homicide team, they're very good detectives. You're not going to get away with it with those guys.
Milton and Marvin are just two human beings. They're human beings that came to the United States to make a living. The victims did not deserve to die in this particular case. And there is really no justification in a lot of the murders that we see and that we investigate. Our job is to get to the facts of what happened. We're the gatherers of the truth. And our opinion on the victim's lifestyle is irrelevant. Because in the end, that's somebody's brother, that's somebody's son, and it's a human being.
We're emergency.
We needed an ambulance and a cop at the Travel Lodge on Harbor Road. My friend was just shot. She's laying in the floor in room 48. I'm not sure if she's still alive or not. Me and my friend just escaped. We've been held hostage for I don't know how long.
I remember getting the 911 call, shots fired at the hotel.
I need you to look and see if she's breathing.
I can't go back up there. We have been kidnapped.
She was laying on her back, face up. She was bleeding out of her eyes and nose. The disbelief that somebody could do this to another human being. This was an execution.
We're emergency.
We needed an ambulance and a cop at the Travel Lodge on Harbor Road. My friend was just shot. She's laying in the floor in room 48. I'm not sure if she's still alive or not. Me and my friend just escaped. We've been held hostage for I don't know how long.
Just after 5 a.m. on July 9th, 2018, Beckley Police Department in West Virginia received a distressing 911 call.
Please, since you send a call.
Okay, I need you to look and see if she's breathing.
I can't go back up there. We have been kidnapped. We have been kidnapped since yesterday.
Okay, ma'am, what's your name?
Destiny Conkle. My other friend just passed out. Wait, just get the cops here.
Ma'am, I'm getting...
I remember getting the 911 call, shots fired at the hotel, and that's the one that I went to.
We don't see homicides all the time. 3 to 5 times a year we'll have these kind of calls. It is a different situation. There's a different gravity to it.
We're almost at the police range, which is where I was that night. Whenever a call that involves a firearm or anything violent like that, we know that if you're available and clear, then you're going. I saw the first officer that was already here. He was running this way. I yelled to him, "Where are you going?" He said, "Up the steps." He was faster than me. He was sprinting on this second level up here. He ran into this doorway here on the end of the building. I lost sight of him at that point. I grabbed a rifle out of my patrol vehicle and I followed him in. I was going up there looking for a very particular type of problem, and that was a human being armed with a gun that's hurting other people. It was 2 rooms. There was like a couch and a table in the first room and an open door on the left. I followed him in through the left. I could tell the initial room where we went in was clear. We went back in. There was 2 beds in the second room. We walked back to the bathroom. He got to the bathroom before I did, and the victim was laying in the floor. I've seen this too many times before, but I could tell she was dead, you know. And I asked him, he was down checking on her, looking for vital signs. And I said, is she gone? He was like, yeah, she's gone. There was a substantial amount of blood. We all receive medical training as first responders, and that's one of the things that we do as far as protocol is to render aid. But it was obvious due to her condition that she was gone. There was no use in that. So I slung my rifle up and went back outside. We set up a perimeter and called detectives.
I was in bed. That call woke me up. At that time, I believe I was working at 8 a.m., and that call was about 5:25 in the morning. So it did wake me from my sleep, and which is not uncommon. So I got in my vehicle and came to the scene.
I received a call from Detective Bragg prior to coming to work, and he informed me that there had been a homicide at the Travel Lodge. You get the call and you have to move pretty urgently, and I probably arrived on scene maybe 20 to 30 minutes later. I do remember walking through the motel room.
It had some symbols of what you would consider maybe a party environment. There were some alcohol containers in an area. There were some food containers nearby. But there were some things that really stood out to us too. There was some damage to the room. There was some lamps that had been broken. A doorknob had been broken off the adjoining door, and pieces of that had been set into an area in the other room.
I remember seeing a chair that was overturned.
That was near that entry door that we came in. I noticed that when we entered the second room, the beds were most disheveled. All the blankets were kind of balled up and like someone had been on that bed for a period of time. And then in the very back of that room is where we actually discovered the victim.
The victim was lying on the ground by the restroom with a gunshot wound. It's something that after time, I mean, you kind of get used to it, but you never, fully get used to it. It's always, tough to see.
There was a significant portion of blood around her, particularly her head. She was bleeding out of her eyes and nose and her ears, but the majority of the blood was underneath her head because that's where the injury had been sustained.
After the initial walkthrough, investigators called for the crime scene unit to process the evidence found at the scene.
It had probably been an hour since the homicide, maybe a little more, since I got called, so everything was secured. They were basically waiting for the crime scene team to get there. When I did roll up, there was 2 females. They were sitting out there still actually upset, crying from the incident. And there was actually a bloody sweater was sitting there next to him, and that was actually the first item that we marked to be collected. We saw there was garbage cans, what's in the garbage cans, cigarettes laying, if there was any drug paraphernalia, any type of ammunition, any type of firearm stuff we were looking for. And then we moved into the other room and then we observed the female. She may have been turned over by EMS or somebody before. That happens a lot. EMS will move a victim, obviously, to see if there's any sign of life in the victim. But when I got there, she was on her back, face up. You could notice if you looked up, you could see a bullet fragment with blood on it or some blood up on the ceiling from where the female was shot. And there was also a broken door handle. We assumed there was some type of struggle at some point in this hotel room. We went through everything in that room, top to bottom. We took hair samples. We did find, which I didn't know it, but the other officer who was on the crime scene team with me, there was a piece of cardboard that he's like, well, that goes to an ammo box. He knew for whatever reason, the way that shape, he knew. So we're like, well, we're taking it, We took the drinks, candy wrappers. There were some sandals there that we took. Anything we can find that would be relevant to the case. It was 50 to 60 pieces of evidence that we took. I mean, we were at least 12 to 14 hours from the time we were at the scene to the time we got back and had everything bagged, sealed, put away in evidence for the evidence tech to come in.
Investigators initially meet Destiny Conkle and Aralia Lacey in the parking lot. Their first contact on scene was with those 2 ladies who would later become identified as victims themselves in addition to being witnesses.
We stayed at the crime scene maybe 30 minutes,
And then once the crime scene unit began processing, me and Detective Bragg responded back to the police department to interview the witnesses.
When you have eyewitnesses, that's a huge piece of the puzzle. We knew that any leads that we were going to get were probably going to come from those interviews, so it's kind of one of the first things we want to do. And plus, we want to get them out of that situation. So the sooner we can interview them and release them and let them, start to grieve and to contact family members and things like that, the sooner we can do that, the better for everybody. So it's something we want to check off that list pretty quickly.
Sometimes witnesses may be a little hesitant to come forward after a few days. So you definitely want to get those witnesses as soon as possible.
We interview separately. They did not like being separated, unfortunately. They wanted to stay together because they've been through this very traumatic thing together. For prosecution purposes, we don't want to kind of mix our statements. They were able to provide the victim's identity. She didn't have any identification on her at that night, but she did have a vehicle that had been left behind, so we were able to run the registration information off that vehicle and then cross-reference that with the identity that the females had provided.
Investigators learned that the victim was 19-year-old Amber Meadows.
They both had told us that they had, prior to them going to the hotel, that they had been at a gas station. So obviously we go to the gas station to review video to see who they were with at the gas station. We knew what kind of vehicle the victim, Amber Meadows, arrived in. So we could watch the parking lot and look for a white passenger car pull up. She gets out of the vehicle and walks into the store.
Amber Meadows goes in the women's restroom.
A few minutes later, a red Jeep pulls into a parking space beside her vehicle, and the four males exited the vehicle and approached her vehicle.
I've been telling her for days, not to mess with him, because I know he's not a good person.
July 9th, 2018. Detectives in Beckley, West Virginia are investigating a homicide at the Travel Lodge Motel. While interviewing the witnesses, they learn more about the sinister events that led up to Amber Meadows' murder that night.
We were sitting at the gas station. She said she had to use the bathroom, so she could walk through, and she was in there for a minute. And we were just sitting in the car waiting on her. And then I just see two guys come up at our door. And I guess they were with Laquan. And I've been telling her for days, not to mess with him, because I know his past, I know his history, I know all about him. I grew up around him. He's not a good person. He's been messaging her the past few days, pictures of a car, pictures of where we are. He knows exactly what we're doing. And I don't know. I looked outside of the car and it's four guys. One white guy, they called him KB. He was the driver of the red Jeep. They all jumped out and opened up our doors and just screaming. And that's where Amber was, and she's in the story, she's a mess.
This gentleman that at that time they referred to as Laquan Hudson, he goes into the store, walks right to the women's restroom and just slings the door open and goes in the women's restroom with her. They were in there less than a minute, and then they come out together, and he kind of escorts her to the door itself.
He was really after her, for him to find her at this gas station and then to go into the bathroom where she's at and bring her out. It was pretty serious. We're just watching that video.
And we got her, and they seemed fine. They was arguing, a little bit.
And then there's probably a half hour of interaction between the groups, almost as if they're fraternizing in this parking lot. The way it was described to us, it was almost as if he was trying to coerce her, making her feel like everything's comfortable, it's playful. We just want to get you girls a room, because they knew that the girls had been staying in that vehicle. We'll get a room at the hotel, and you guys can spend the night there, take a shower, and so forth, that kind of thing.
He convinced, urged the girls to go back to this motel with them. And and went so far as to put one of the 4 men in the vehicle with the girls.
He made his friend get in the back seat with me, and he had a gun in his hand.
And then they begin to leave, and then at one point you see standing in the door of Amber's car, she's trying to back out of the parking spot, and she continues to hit him with her car door because he won't get out of the way.
There was an element of force displayed at the convenience store, both in terms of invading the privacy of a restroom with Miss Meadows, and then putting one of the 4 men in the vehicle with the girls armed to ensure that they went to the motel.
And they were following us behind. They made us go to the Travel Lodge.
Unfortunately, there wasn't any video available from the Travel Lodge itself. You don't actually see them arrive, but Lieutenant Bloom had actually been doing what we consider an extra patrol through the area. He'd actually traveled through there and actually witnessed them there himself before they had checked in.
Lieutenant Bragg reached out to me a few days afterwards, and he said, "Hey, do you remember going on patrol around the building maybe 3 hours before this happened?" I actually saw the people that were involved in this homicide. I don't remember seeing the victim, but I do clearly remember seeing the offender. I'd been at work for at least 10, 12 hours already that day, so how many hundreds, if not thousands of people had I already interacted with during that shift alone? So it never really registered. It was a small group of people. They were kind of being loud, but they were younger people just goofing off, for lack of a better term, in the parking lot. And by all indicators, everybody was happy and having a good time, kind of relaxed. I didn't see any signs of stress or fear or anything like that. I rolled my window down a little and spoke to someone in the group. "Hey, how's it going?" And I drove around the motel and went back out. That's one thing that I beat myself up over is like, did I miss something from the victim? Did she give me any sort of indication there was a problem or anything? And I've replayed it over and over in my mind. I don't think that I missed anything, but I think any human being would wonder about that.
Laquan goes into the lobby to reserve the room, use a fake ID.
We did speak with the clerk at the hotel. We knew that room 48 had been rented by somebody. So we asked, "Do you have any records of that?" There was an identification card that had been scanned by the hotel employee. It was a black male, long dread hair. So at that time, he was our prime suspect because the assumption is this guy has used his identification card. The employee has seen the person, knew that the card matched.
And somehow one of the guys that had rented the room had acquired this ID and used it. This gentleman was never there.
And the 4 of them go to the second floor of the motel. Once that door closed, it was like a switch flipped. The mood changed from, "Hey, let's hang out," to "No one leaves here until we say you can leave."
I moved here about 20 years ago. I was in Fayette County originally. Beckley was always kind of the quote-unquote big city of southern West Virginia. It's kind of the economic hub, I guess you'd say. Fayette County is much more rural, so we didn't have the crime problem that we have here in Beckley, things like that. But once I got hired, I was kind of in for a shock, just how busy this agency was and how the things that we deal with.
I was a reporter in southern West Virginia for more than a decade when this happened. I had covered a lot of different types of crimes, mainly in the Beckley area. What's interesting about Beckley is we're at the intersection of Interstate 77 and 64. So that kind of naturally makes it a little bit of a drug hub for the state, just that those 2 big roads are intersecting.
We've seen it shift from crack cocaine back in 2005 era, whenever I first started here, to prescription pills and medication, and now we've got a heroin problem, we've got a meth problem, and that addiction problem leads to people committing other crimes.
The next step for the investigators is to find Amber's family and inform them of her death.
We had a very busy crime scene unit at that moment, so we knew that the responsibility for notifying family was not being taken care of, so we knew that we needed to do that. We had learned that she didn't have a lot of family in the area. Unfortunately, her mother lived in a very rural part of the area. There was no father involved at that time. We knew that from the interviews of the other two females that they had actually, the three of them had been living together and had unfortunately been staying in her vehicle, had been living in the car for a period of time prior to the incident. She basically was of little means at this point in time. She was kind of staying with her friends and didn't have a whole lot of resources. Myself and Detective Pinnell traveled to an area called Bragg, West Virginia. It's a very rural area, but we discovered that's where the mother resided. We went there and spent probably 2 hours just trying to locate her, knocking on doors, asking if neighbors were familiar with her, that sort of thing. At that time, we were unable to locate her, so we returned back to the city and began to work on the investigation itself. Later in the day, one of the neighbors had told her that we came looking for her, and she called. And unfortunately, it was the only time I've had to give a death notification over the phone. We don't want to do that. Obviously, it's insensitive in some ways, so we didn't want to do it that way. But unfortunately, she called and asked why we were looking for her, and we had to make that notification over the phone. That was rough, and she was very distraught. Wanted some more detail. At that point, we hadn't done the investigation, so we didn't have a whole lot of answers for her. All we could tell her is that her daughter was deceased and that it had come from an act of violence.
Back at the crime lab, Ryan Cuevas from the Beckley Police Department is processing the evidence collected from the crime scene.
As we go through our evidence, we start at number 1, which was the shirt we found at the one stop with the girls that was sitting there, which I believe had some suspected blood on it. Once we got to the garbage bags, we go through it. We found wrappers. When we find that, we call the bureau. We're like, look, we got a receipt here. You may want to go check the cameras from that time. We eventually get to a receipt from Walmart. We call Detective Bragg with the information of the time.
They determined that receipt was for ammunition that had been purchased at a local Walmart. So we were very excited by that fact that we may now have quality video of our suspects, or at least one of our suspects. So the next thing we did was try to get that video. We were able to see them arrive in a Subaru vehicle. You could clearly tell that it was the same suspects from the video from the convenience store, wearing the same clothing. This was several hours earlier in the day. It was on the 8th. They had actually made the ammunition purchase. And then later that night is when they interact with Amber and her friends in the parking lot of that gas station.
They walk into the Walmart. You see the three individuals go back to the sporting goods section in a very deliberate manner. They pick out what type of ammunition they want. Mr. Hudson pulls out a wallet and pulls out a wad of $100 bills and pays for cash right there on the spot. They put the ammunition in the bag, and then they stroll back out of the Walmart just as pretty as you please.
We had been provided the name Laquan. We weren't familiar with Laquan by that name. Once we obtained the Walmart video, that's what really kind of sealed the identification for us, is we were able to watch that Walmart video and confer with other officers, and they immediately identified him and knew him as David Hudson. We reviewed his information and realized his middle name was Laquan. So once we knew it was David Laquan Hudson, we knew we were looking at our prime suspect. David had some previous arrests, mostly related to drug activity. He did have a weapons charge prior to this. He's not someone that I had personally dealt with, but I do know that some of the officers that work in our narcotics field, our drug unit, they were familiar with him, that they had had involvement, they had had charges on him, but we did not know the other three suspects. Now that we identified David Hudson from the video of Walmart, we knew now we need to follow up and identify these other individuals, and those were kind of leads that we were able to start following to get to identifications on those people.
We ultimately recover out of that the receipt, the bag, and that cardboard paper that goes between the two different rows of ammunition in that ammunition box.
Was this the plan all along? Did they go to purchase this ammunition with the goal of finding Amber Meadows and killing her? Or did they have something else in mind? We did not find any boxes of ammunition at the scene, so we knew that it had left with whoever had been there. But it certainly made us question, was this a much more premeditated act? From the interviews of the witnesses, one of the things that we can deduce is that there was a real shift that occurred. Once they arrived at that motel, it was almost kind of a night and day change. Those girls knew that they were not allowed to leave that room and that nobody was getting out of there until David Hudson got what he wanted.
The men took all the cell phones from the girls. One of the men moved a chair in front of the door and occupied that chair for the majority of the time that everyone was in this room.
Laquan pulled out a firearm. There was a lot of yelling, and he was demanding that she had owed him something, some money.
They were arguing about drugs. Apparently, he felt like she stole drugs from him or something, but apparently it was her boyfriend that she was with, and they had problems with each other, so he came after her.
They advised that throughout the night they were kind of taunted over and over that he had a revolver firearm. He would open the cylinder and remove all but one bullet. He would spin the cylinder and then place it to their heads and pull the trigger.
They scream at us a little bit, and it was just chaos for a long time. Mm-hmm. They kept pointing their guns and stuff in our faces and screaming. And the green lasers on one of their guns. He made us go in the other room and sit on the couch. He had one of the guys staying at the door watch us. He always had guns.
He pulled out a mallet of some sort and began to beat things in the room, knocked the door handles off of the doors, broke some lamps in the room. He also had another firearm that had a laser on it, and he would take the laser and place it on them and taunt them throughout the night, just to make them wonder if they were actually about to be shot or not. And they said this went on for several hours.
Laquan and the bigger dude was the most violent ones. Kept saying that they was going to kill us. He bullied us all night.
Okay.
Was.
Okay.
I've never experienced anything like that.
Aurelia and Destiny are separated from Amber.
He made her sleep in the bathtub. And all of a sudden, I had to use the bathroom, so they made us go into the other room, where the other bathroom was. And Mommy and Destiny was in there, because she didn't want to leave me alone. I heard gunshots. He was trying to open the bathroom door. He was like, she shot herself. I knew she did. She wouldn't have done it. She was so scared that she was going to die that night.
Destiny and Aurelia walk into the living room and they see the four men hastily gathering up belongings and fleeing the room.
I ran in the other room. Laquan was just grabbing stuff and screaming. She shot herself and grabbed everything. He's like, you talk, you're dead. I did see him with a gun, like he was panicking and scary and stuff. So I grabbed Aurelia and we took off running.
Those two women weren't sure whether they were going to walk out of that room that night with their lives.
It was a bad night. They were very traumatized by the whole situation.
They heard the gun explode. They saw that she was shot, but who did it, they did not know.
They said that there was a white male who had been involved, that he was the owner of the red Jeep, and that he went by the nickname KB. We had shown the image of KB to officers throughout the county. One of them had recognized him as Caleb Bird and knew that Caleb Bird had been recently driving a red Jeep SUV. So that was huge. So we knew that, okay, now we have a name to go with this moniker. So we wanted to track him down and find that Jeep. The next day, an officer had actually located the Jeep. And we traveled to that location. Sure enough, it matched the Jeep that we had seen on that video. We also were able to determine that he had a residence, this apartment complex where the Jeep had been found. We went to that apartment. We forced entry into the apartment. His father was inside. We recovered some firearms from the residence that were of particular interest because one of the things that the victims had told us was that a firearm with a green laser had been used to taunt them throughout the night. And we recovered 2 guns from that residence that had green lasers. I advised Caleb's father to get a hold of him, to get him to turn himself into me. A short time later, he called and said Caleb was now at the residence and was willing to be taken into custody.
So I get some water and a cigarette before we...
I'll get some water. I can't make a cigarette in here, but I will take you out for a break.
That's fine. I mean, like I said, if I can do that right now, we won't have to take no more breaks. And
well, let me get you the water first, and then we'll talk.
Yeah. All right. I'm just gonna lay it out to you, and then we can go from there.
Okay.
You don't understand how hard this is for me.
July 10th, 2018. The day after Amber Meadows' murder, investigators have identified Jonathan Caleb Byrd as one of the men involved that night.
We interviewed him in the police station. At this point in time, he was in custody. He was under arrest. We advised him of his Miranda rights. He agreed to waive those rights and speak with us without a lawyer present.
It's you and who else? Tyreek and this guy named Shocker. I don't know his real name. That's his street name, Shocker. Heavier set with dreads.
Okay.
And then there's David Hudson. That's the only full name that I've got.
Okay.
They paid me some gas money to give them a ride. I guess they had to go pick up some drugs or whatever they had to do. You know, I've done it for him like 2 other times before that. Just gave him a ride to wherever he needed to go. Okay. And then he's always just taking care of me. He's seemed like a pretty cool guy.
When you say he identified our third suspect. He provided the name Tyreek Pearl and also told us that Tyreek lived in the apartment complex where Caleb lived, which is something that we did not know prior to that interview. We went to that apartment complex, tried to make contact with Tyreek. He was not home, but I did speak to a family member who seemed very helpful. It was several hours later, but I received information that he had actually walked into our police department with that family member and was now ready to turn himself in. So I went back there, took him into custody as well, and very similar to the situation with Caleb, we began an interview with Tyreek.
Those 2 gave full, in my view, honest detail about what happened that led up to the death of Amber Meadows, both in terms of who all was involved and who did what, because Tyreek Pearl and Jonathan Byrd, they were in the room when the trigger was pulled.
He was intimidating her a little bit, and then started just talking to her.
And then was he accusing her of the...
Yeah. And then, and then he started hugging on her, and gave her a kiss, a couple things like that. Okay. So I thought it was all cool. Tyreek gets in the vehicle with them. And then Hudson and Shaka, they got in my vehicle, and we followed them to the Travel Lodge.
All 3 of the girls agreed to go to a hotel.
Okay.
We did not force them to do anything they did not want to do. I'm not that type of person. I'd have left if I didn't accept.
Okay.
Real talk. I'm not that type of person. I don't know why he told me how to go. I promise you, I do not know why he told me to hop in that car.
Okay. Caleb kind of indicated that he felt threatened as well, and he said that was why he didn't remove himself in that situation, is because he felt like David meant nobody was leaving, including the friends that he had brought, that nobody was getting out of that room until he got what he wanted.
Went there for a little bit. He's talking a little bit of to Amber, and then... and then...
What do you mean a little bit
just talking I mean, just flashing guns at him, and all that good stuff.
What's it talking about? I mean, at this point?
And just talking about that the drugs being taken.
Okay. I mean, at this
trying
point,
to intimidate.
she did.
Yeah, trying to intimidate her. He explains to me, as well as the other two guys in the room, that we're not allowed to leave until he says so.
What about the girls?
No, they were definitely not allowed to leave, period.
How many times he was in there saying the girls was hostages?
Okay.
But I thought he was playing. I promise you, Amber, she was scared. So if I was her, no, I wouldn't have thought I could leave either.
His gun, which was a 38 special revolver, it was fully loaded when we get in the room, and he was pulling it back, like pulling back the hammer, putting it up to her head, and, you know, intimidating her, making her cry. Yeah, and eventually what he did was he unloaded the gun, all but one bullet, and would just spin it around, or at first he said, let's play Russian roulette, and Tyreek said, no, don't do that.
Tyreek Pearl in particular and Jonathan Bird, two of the assailants, at some point they got increasingly worried about being involved in this and that this was going in a bad direction. Mr. Pearl took Mr. Hudson's gun from him and put it in the bathroom. Amber Meadows went into the bathroom, used the bathroom, and found the gun in the bathroom.
He started freaking out because he couldn't find his gun. Amber tells me that it was left in the bathroom, and then he goes and picks it up.
She walks out of the bathroom and she shows it to David Hudson and says, listen, your gun was in the bathroom. He immediately takes the gun from her and he says, you're stupid. You could have killed me with this. She said, I would not kill you.
I looked at him, I said, oh, it's empty, because he said, oh, you could have got me the whole time. I said, it's empty, so she would have been, you know, just, yeah, and then he said, no, it ain't, no, it ain't, no, it ain't, bow. And that went off, like I said, right in front of my face.
Pointed the gun, did this, and he was like, no. And shot him.
What do you mean he did this?
It's like he checked, for real. Okay. Like he checked if it was a bullet in the gun. And I got up, ran, KD, ran, shot up, ran.
What happened?
I turned back around and was like, oh, we gotta go. And before I was like, oh, we gotta go, he walked up to me and was like, we gotta kill the rest of them. And I said no. And I ran off and we left them.
Okay.
Mr. Hudson said, we can't leave any witnesses. So the only reason this isn't a triple homicide is because there was only one round of ammunition in David Hudson's gun.
At that point, our focus was capturing David Hudson. But we knew he was going to be hiding better than anybody because he knew what he had done.
Two days after Amber Meadows' murder, investigators have identified two of the suspects involved that night. They are now on the hunt for one man known as Shaka and their prime suspect, David Hudson.
None of the residences we had gone to check for David, we couldn't find him at that point. We had been in contact with some of his family members. They advised us that they would encourage him to turn himself in, but we had received no contact of that nature. In the meantime, Tyreek told us the identity of our fourth suspect, which was, he went by the nickname Shaka. We learned his real name was Antonio Williams, and that was the first time we had heard that actual name. We identified an address for him in the Harper area of West Virginia. We immediately traveled there, tried to make contact with him at his residence. His sister was still at the residence, but he was not. Around 15 minutes later, he showed up at the residence and walked up to us thinking that we were looking for somebody else, and we immediately took him into custody. We called him Shaka just to see how he would respond, and he actually told us, that's not my nickname. I don't know what you're talking about. As we're leaving, two of his family members were talking to him, and they actually referred to him repeatedly as Shaka. We're going to get you out, Shaka. We'll get a bond for you, Shaka. And so we knew we were dealing with the correct guy. He refused to provide a statement of any sort. He was pretty aggressive and did not want to participate in any fashion. So we did not obtain any kind of statement from Mr. Williams. And at that point, our focus was capturing David Hudson. So we reached out, contacted his mother again. They lived in an area of Harper as well. We went to that residence. She allowed us to search the residence. He was not there. But she did tell us that he would turn himself in. So we were hopeful, but doubtful. So we continued to search while we waited on that. He did not turn himself in when she said he would. But the next morning, we received a call from a local attorney, and the local attorney told us that he had David with him and that he would be willing to turn himself in, but he was not going to provide any sort of statement. Unfortunately, we weren't going to get the full story, probably ever, and I think it's one of the most frustrating things as an investigator is when you have a person that you know committed the crime and they just won't tell the story. We'll never know for sure why David Hudson chose to pull that trigger.
3 years later, in December 2021, David Hudson's trial begins.
Mr. Pearl and Mr. Bird, they were culpable. They certainly led to the overall intimidation of these women. However, they didn't pull the trigger. They didn't take the girl's life. A fair resolution for them was to plead to the conspiracy to kill Amber Meadows, not the actual killing, and then thereby secure their cooperation for trial.
Antonio Williams was ultimately convicted of kidnapping and voluntary manslaughter because he had also participated in keeping them there and the homicide itself.
I approached him. He would not cooperate. He pled guilty and he went to prison for 20 years.
This is day 2 of the David Hudson trial. The prosecution is working to make the case that it was Hudson who pulled the trigger. Later, the jury heard from the state medical examiner, who presented evidence showing the gun was fired at close range.
It was a week-long trial. Not only were we trying a capital murder case, but we also had the capital crime of kidnapping. Either case would have been a challenge alone, but to combine them was a significant challenge.
People didn't really start to take an interest in this case until the trial happened and people learned more about all the different things that had transpired that night.
It was very tense because you're dealing with a 19-year-old victim. Any murder is bad, but essentially, this was an execution. To shoot somebody in the back of the head at basically point-blank range is a pretty savage thing to do.
Attending trials, it's always nerve-wracking. You know that the person's guilty because you know about the case, and you just don't know what the jury is going to decide. I was in the Detective Bureau for 10 years, and out of those 10 years, I don't think that we've ever had a case with this much evidence.
The defense tried throughout the case to punch holes in the prosecution's version of events and plant that seed of doubt in the jury that it could have been David Hudson, but it also could have been any of these other guys that were also in the room. In the end, it wasn't enough to sway the jury.
David Hudson was convicted of 3 counts of kidnapping, the homicide of Amber Meadows, and then using a firearm in the commission of a felony. So it ended up that he was convicted on all counts, and he received 4 life sentences to run consecutive, so he'll never be out.
It's all about getting justice for the family. That was always my main focus, was getting justice for the victim and the family.
There was some family at the trial. Unfortunately, she didn't have a whole lot of family members in the area, so there weren't a lot. But unfortunately, she really didn't have a whole lot of support group to help her.
The age of the victim, her being, 19 years old, that's always tough. You don't want to see anyone murdered, but especially when it's a young person. So anytime there's a young person murdered, that always stands out.
What I kept going back to and thinking about was when I was 19, I had that hope to improve and have a tomorrow. And David Hudson took that from her.
She had her whole life ahead of her at 19 years old, so it's devastating.